The mystery from the dirt. The wooden bullet that baffled American GIs. Picture this. The spring of 1945, or maybe it's already summer. The final shots of the war in Europe have faded, but the air is still thick with the smell of smoke and gunpowder. Soviet soldiers, hardened in the crucible of the fiercest battles, are now combing through the territories of former German defensive positions, training camps, and firing ranges. They had seen it all. The hell of Stalingrad, the tank armadas at Kursk, and the madness of Panzerfaust in urban combat. It seemed like nothing could surprise them anymore. But one day, while sifting through the dirt in a trench or a captured barracks, a soldier finds a strange object. It looks like a standard rifle cartridge. He'd seen thousands of them, but its tip is wooden. Not scorched, not metallic, but a real, light yellow, slightly rough to the touch, wooden cone. What is this? A joke? A craft project? The first reaction is pure bewilderment. The soldiers pass the oddity from hand to hand, twisting it, examining it. You can hear the jokes. Looks like the Germans got so poor they resorted to toys. Or this must be a souvenir for a Frau back in Berlin. But the laughter quickly dies down. The war had taught them not to laugh at strange things. Any little thing could be a deadly trap. A booby trap? Some kind of clever sabotage? But no, it was just a piece of wood, neatly inserted into a standard metal casing. This is how one of the most persistent and intriguing mysteries of World War II began. The mystery of the German wooden bullet. Stories about such finds are a dime a dozen. They were found near Rzhev, on the approaches to Berlin, and in Belarus. Each new find spawned a new pile of guesses, new speculations, new theories. Some said it was a child's toy, made by a soldier in a trench out of boredom and homesickness. Others insisted it was a replacement for a blank round, for safe training exercises. The most ardent skeptics wrote it all off as post-war fakery and hoaxes. But, folks, the truth, as is so often the case, turned out to be much more interesting and mundane than any fiction. And it was hidden not in the cunning plans of the German general staff, but in the dry, merciless logic of economics and total resource scarcity. This is a story not about military genius, but about military desperation. And to get to the bottom of it, we'll have to take a journey not only to the battlefields, but also into the offices of financiers, on factory floors, and into the depths of the global economy of that era. Buckle up, it's going to be interesting. A forest of theories. What did the soldiers come up with? The Soviet soldier was a practical and quick-witted person. His life often depended on his ability to quickly assess a situation and make the right decision. Faced with the unexplained, he looked for an explanation through the lens of his own experience. The first, most obvious version, training ammo. This theory was the frontrunner. Wooden bullets were often found on training grounds, in barracks, in places that looked like training bases. The logic is simple. To train a young Volkssturm soldier, or even a regular infantryman in the basics of shooting, you don't need live ammunition, which is worth its weight in gold. A wooden bullet, with enough ballistics to practice aiming and firing, but not capable of killing at a long distance, seemed like an ideal solution. It's cheap, its production doesn't require scarce metals, and it's relatively safe if the distance is respected. This version was the closest to the truth, but, as we will learn later, not complete. The second, sentimental version, soldier's handicraft. War is not just about attacks and trenches. It's long hours of waiting, melancholy, and uncertainty. In such moments, a soldier's hands looked for something to do. They carved wooden spoons, cigarette cases, and figurines. Why not carve a bullet? As a talisman, a keepsake, or a gift for a wife or child. Here, son, your dad's at war, have a souvenir. A beautiful, heartfelt version, but unlikely. The finds were mass-produced. There were far too many talismans, and the quality of workmanship was often not makeshift, but factory-made. Neat. Standardized. This doesn't look like the work of a knife in a trench by the light of a kerosene lamp. The third, sinister version, sabotage and psychological warfare. What if this is a special weapon for wounding, not killing? It's known that a wounded soldier takes several people out of action, those who help him. Maybe the wooden bullet, lacking lethal force, but capable of inflicting a painful wound, was designed for just that? Or, even more cunningly, it was a weapon of psychological impact? Imagine, you're being shot at with wooden bullets. This demonstrates contempt, mockery, a show of superiority. We don't even need to spare metal on you. However, this version doesn't hold water. War is a pragmatic business, spending time, resources, and logistics to deliver to the front a weapon that doesn't kill is the height of irrationality for the pedantic German engineers. The fourth, skeptical version, it's all a fake. With the advent of the internet, this version has become incredibly popular. This can't be, because it can never be, is its motto. The skeptic's arguments, at first glance, seem ironclad. Temperature. When fired, a monstrous temperature of several thousand degrees is created in the barrel. The wood will simply burn up before it even leaves the muzzle. Friction. A wooden bullet in a steel barrel, it will crumble from friction and pressure. Durability. Even if it flies out of the barrel, it will shatter into splinters at the first obstacle, a leaf, a branch, a greatcoat. Sounds convincing, right? But this is exactly where we get to the most interesting part, because these arguments are shattered by real historical and physical facts. Let's figure it out. Debunking the myths. Could wood actually withstand a shot? So the skeptics are shouting, it burns, it crumbles, it doesn't work, but let's not take their word for it. Let's use logic and look at the facts. Fact 1. What could be different? When we say wood, we think of pine or birch, but the world of flora is much more diverse. There are species that are rightly called ironwood. Take a piece of Lignum vitae or guaiacum. Try to scratch it with a nail, you won't get far. Its density is such that it sinks in water. Its strength is comparable to some metal alloys, and its resistance to high temperatures is much higher than that of ordinary wood. German engineers, experiencing an acute shortage of resources, were well aware of these properties. It is quite likely that for their special cartridges they used precisely such types of wood, additionally treated to increase heat resistance. Fact 2. Modern analogs. And now for the main counterargument. To claim that a wooden bullet is not viable is to ignore the entire modern experience of non-lethal weapons. Look around. These days, rubber and plastic bullets are widely used. Yes, you heard that right. Plastic. And it melts at much lower temperatures than the aforementioned ironwood can withstand. But engineers solve that problem too. Through the composition of the polymer, special coatings, and the rate of fire, the bullet doesn't have time to heat up in the fractions of a second it's in the barrel. Plastic bullets have become a reality. A prime example is the Israeli army. For many years, they have used plastic bullets with a small metal core to disperse demonstrations. And, alas, the statistics are sad. According to human rights organizations, such bullets have been the cause of death for over 40 Palestinians. This proves even a non-lethal round made of a seemingly unsuitable material can be dangerous and effective. So why couldn't wood, especially specially treated wood, perform the same task 75 years ago? It could. And how? It wasn't meant to kill. Its task was different. Thus, the myth of the technical impossibility of a wooden bullet can be safely discarded. It was not only possible, but also quite functional within the framework of the task set for it. And this brings us to the main question: what exactly was the task? To answer it, we need to dive into the abyss of the global economy of 1943 to 1945, the economics of total war. Why Germany had to switch to wood. Here we are at the crux of the matter. To understand the phenomenon of the wooden bullet, you need to forget for a minute about the battlefields and move into ministry offices, onto stock exchanges, and into factory workshops. War is not only about strategy and tactics. It is, first and foremost, economics. And by the end of the war, the economy of the Third Reich was like a beaten horse about to collapse. Economic briefing. The German war machine on the brink. Imagine Germany in 1939. A powerful, well-oiled war machine. Panzers are tearing through Europe. Junkers are gaining air superiority. Raw materials are flowing in from occupied countries. Industry is working at full capacity. It seems this stream will never run dry. But by 1943, the picture begins to change catastrophically. Blockade and loss of resources. The Allies, Great Britain, the USA, the USSR, waged an effective economic war. The naval blockade cut off the supply of strategic raw materials from overseas. And with the losses on the Eastern Front, Germany lost access to nickel from Petsamo, manganese from Ukraine, and chromium from Turkey. Bombing. Strategic bombing by Allied air forces turned Germany's industrial regions into ruins. Krupp factories, steelworks, chemical plants, all were systematically destroyed from the air. Production was falling catastrophically. Shortage of non-ferrous and ferrous metals. This is the key point for our story. Lead, copper, steel, the foundation of any cartridge. The casing is copper or steel coated with copper bimetal. The bullet core is lead, often in a steel or cupronickel jacket. By the end of the war, there was a real disaster with these metals. Copper was needed for casings, electrical wiring, and engine parts. Lead was for bullets, batteries for submarines and tanks. Steel was for everything, from tanks to rifles. The Germans were forced to look for replacements. They launched a scrap metal collection program throughout the country and occupied territories. They removed copper door handles from houses, melted down monuments, and church bells. But still wasn't enough. The economy of a warring country is a giant cannon that constantly demands new food. And this cannon was beginning to starve. It was at this moment that the word shortage became the main word in the lexicon of German engineers and logisticians. Shortage, optimization, economy. Every gram of lead, every kilogram of steel was accounted for. And that's when some pragmatic engineer, looking at the drawings of the standard 7.92 by 57 millimeters cartridge, had a brilliant thought in its simplicity. What if we replaced the lead core with a wooden one? The true purpose. The answer that was lying on the surface. So, we've come to the solution. Economics dictated the terms. The war demanded resources. Engineers were looking for solutions. And this solution was found. The wooden bullet was neither a toy nor sabotage. It was a forced measure dictated by a harsh economic reality. The version confirmed by historians and archival data. Cartridge for training and practice shooting, Übungsmunition. Here's how it most likely worked. Goal: to create the cheapest possible cartridge for the mass training of new Volkssturm recruits and for maintaining the shooting skills of regular units in the rear. Design: a standard cartridge case was taken with a reduced powder charge. Saving gunpowder was also an important factor. Instead of lead bullet, a bullet turned from hardwood was pressed into the case mouth. Principle of operation: such a cartridge did not have the lethal force of a full-fledged live round. It could not penetrate a steel helmet or even a thick board at a significant distance. But it was sufficient for practicing weapon recoil, getting used to the sound of the shot, training in aiming and shooting at targets at short distances up to 100 meters, checking the operation of rifle or machine gun mechanisms, for example, the MG42, without the risk of wearing out an expensive barrel with live ammunition and without the risk of killing a comrade in the trench. It was a brilliant, albeit desperate, solution. One wooden bullet saved several grams of lead and steel. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of training shots per year. The savings were colossal. But then why wasn't the theory about training cartridges accepted immediately? Why was there such confusion? The answer, as often is the case, is in the details. There is evidence that the Germans tried to go even further. Projects appeared to create wooden cartridge cases. Yes, entire cartridges made almost entirely of wood, except for the primer. But these projects were unsuccessful. Wood could not provide the necessary obturation, sealing the barrel upon firing. The cases ruptured, and the weapons failed. These failed experiments, information about which was passed along like a game of telephone, may have generated some of the skeptical reviews about the impossibility of wooden ammunition in principle. Thus, the chain of events lines up in perfect, prosaic, and ironclad logic. Total war, economic blockade, and resource shortage search for economy's development of a cheap training cartridge with a wooden bullet mass production and use on training ranges rapid advance of Soviet troops and capture of these ranges, discovery of strange cartridges by Soviet soldiers, interrogations of captured German soldiers and engineers who provided the final answer. The mystery was solved. The myth was dispelled. But what can this story tell us today? Lessons from history. The wooden bullet as a symbol. This little wooden bullet is not just a curiosity. It is a powerful symbol, an artifact that speaks volumes. A symbol of a regime's agony. The found wooden bullet is a silent witness to the agony of the Third Reich. It speaks more eloquently than any report about the desperate situation the invincible German war machine found itself in. When the greatest military industry in Europe starts making bullets out of wood, it's a sure sign of its imminent end. It is a symbol of a collapse that begins not on the battlefield, but in the economy. A lesson in resource dependence. History repeats itself. And today, in the 21st century, issues of resource security, supply chains, and import substitution are just as acute. The conflicts of a new era also come down to economics. The wooden bullet reminds us, no country, no matter how powerful, can wage a long-term total war in isolation and with a shortage of critically important resources. A memory of the common soldier. For the Soviet soldier who found this bullet, it was tangible proof that the enemy was weakening. It gave strength. It was a small but important psychological victory. It became part of the soldier's folklore, part of our shared memory of that war. A memory full of not only horror and pain, but also surprise and questions that we continue to seek answers to. So what was it for? So let's have all the eyes. The German wooden bullet is not a mystification, not a toy, and not sabotage. It is a training and practice cartridge created under conditions of total shortage of strategic resources, lead and steel, at the twilight of World War II for the mass and cheap training of personnel. There was no military cunning in it. There was military desperation and harsh pragmatism. It was a cry for help from the economy, embodied in wood and metal. The solution to this mystery was lying on the surface, but it took decades to discard the conjectures and accept the simple and harsh truth. The truth that even the most powerful war machine breaks when it runs out of resources, and then it starts shooting wooden bullets. Well, that's the story we've put together. From a simple find in the dirt to global economic processes. Our story ends here, but the discussion does not. I've done a ton of work studying archives, reports, and memoirs to piece this picture together for you. Now it's your turn. Write in the comments. Had you ever heard about wooden bullets before? Which version seemed the most plausible to you before reading this story? What other strange inventions do you think were born out of desperation in that war? Your like and comment is the best reward for me and a signal for the YouTube algorithm that you're interested in such topics. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our next investigations. We have many more military secrets, historical mysteries, and economic analyses ahead. See you soon.